Yo, this is the ancient Texan. Um, I've got some questions from my son, and we start off kind of on the subject of robustness, and we delve into some other questions like predicting the future. No problem with that. So here's my son's question, his file. I'm going to see how well it merges into this video. I'm also curious, Dad. Okay, so I had this. My mom is waiting for a fan to be installed or ordered and brought and installed on her air conditioner. So the air conditioner is not really working at her house, and of course it's 90 degrees, and so she's getting pretty hot in there. And it all comes down to basically a single part or component that kept her from having air conditioning, which is not the end of the world in this case, but um, as we deal with more of these energy constraints and supply shortages and maybe discontinuations, I can just see how you know some of these more specialized devices in our world will be harder and harder to service and maintain. I mean, I think our automobiles are a good example too, because um, right now they seem to be reliant upon a lot of chips and relays, and Finn's car just shut down as a result of a bad relay. And right now it seems like that stuff is in stock, but it's not hard to imagine how that stuff would be not in stock, you know, given how many different proprietary parts there are out there and how much those depend upon, you know, long supply chains. Um, it's kind of mind dizzying, boggling to start trying to figure it out, because it's pretty it's it's a pretty wild um, situation in a way. So I guess what I'm trying to get to here is, what do you imagine the timeline is for the stability of our energy and resources? I mean, what are you thinking at this point is the outline of our time ahead? Like, do you give there being, sort of this slow, gradual, like, kind of problem, or do you feel like, you know, I don't know what you said, it was 9 or 11 different things might sort of coalesce in a similar timeline and cause there to be more catastrophic losses of ability to maintain the system, either through energy or through the parts of the system that are limited or, constrained in some way. Do you understand what I'm asking? Like, what do you what do you imagine is our timeline ahead? Our near the next 5 years, so to speak. And
Okay, that's a question by my son, and I'm not the world's smartest guru, but I do have some opinions since he's asking me. I I try to categorize the problems in terms of severity, uh, and if I ignore, nuclear weapons and Russia going off the deep end, or Pakistan and India getting in a nuclear battle. So I'm going to ignore that kind of stuff. But I think what's going to happen as we move forward is we've got a national debt that's going to kind of preempt all other problems. I think the interest rate is going to climb from, around 5% now to 7%, and maybe as early as by the end of the first quarter of 2027. If not by the end of 2027, not the first quarter, but the end of the year. And that's going to make everything more expensive. It's going to drive up inflation. It's going to make houses more expensive. Gasoline's going to go through the roof because we haven't seen the end of uh, the problems that we've got by starting a war in Iran and the Strait of Hormuz and Trump and tariffs. And I think it's all going to catch up with us before Trump gets out of office. That's kind of a wish. And we're going to see a decline in American way of life. Now, I don't know if we're going to respond to that in a political way and kick people out of you know office and put new people in, or we're going to go to some revolution that's going to be somewhere in between. But we're going to see pretty dramatic changes happen here, you know, in 2027. And I am not optimistic about our world. Anyway, let's hear some more of Mike's question.
What sort of guesses do you sit with regarding how our infrastructure behaves over the next 5 years? I obviously don't know. There's a lot of balls in the air. It's not a obviously. I know you don't know, but you must have some amount of guessing going on in your brain about all this and concerns, like specific concerns. I guess what I was thinking was like, okay, so we have these automobiles, we have these machines that keep our food. So basically, there's a lot of single point, failures that could easily just take down a whole lot of local systems. In my world, I mean, we had a bridge go out, and like all kinds of supplies were cut off because of that bridge. I mean, the workarounds were made up, but it was constrained quite a bit. But that's just an example I have in my local experience. But I feel like there's a lot of directions that one could go with that sort of basic problem set. And yeah, I guess I'm just curious what you foresee, because I'm constantly now thinking, okay, what other options do I have for like cooling my mom's house? What other options do I have for keeping food with less power? Because right now we're about to go into winter, and we have generators, but I don't know if you've looked at the the super El Nino situation, but there's a pretty intense winter coming for a number of us. And where we sit, we actually are at the sort of edge confluence. I'll send you a picture, but something between, more cold, more wet, nor'easter, severe storms. Like, we happen to sit at the junction where all those things could possibly exist at once, or in succession, or however it goes. But the point I'm getting to is that it looks like energy is going to cost considerably more, meaning natural gas, diesel, and the things that we do to keep ourselves warm, and the supplies themselves may be constrained to some degree. I'm just imagining the confluence of severe winter over a large area, and there being constraints, and energy costs go way up, it could be a very, very problematic winter for a lot of people. And, you know, power plants all have lots of parts to them, and I don't know how many of those parts they have on hand to swap out, kind of like you were saying with the profit incentive at the magnesium plant or whatever. It was like, we can't afford redundancies. We have to do, we'll replace as we go, kind of a thing. Well, that's clearly highly dependent upon people having ample supply of parts all over the world ready to be assembled and shipped, at a moment's notice, which is apparently not the direction we're heading now. So anyway, I'm just curious about what your outline is for that. Like, if you have any particular thoughts or general thoughts around that theme.
Well, Mike, I wish I was Nostradamus. I think I can do that in a metallurgical facility. I'm not so sure I can do it out in the broader world. But I think our financial system is going to start collapsing first. The interest is going to start going through the roof on our national debt. Our treasury bonds, especially the 30-year bonds, are going to start going through the roof. And that's going to trickle down to every other area of our life. First affordability, but then something like El Nino coming in, that's going to mean we're less prepared. All these things couple together, each one makes the other one worse. Um, I wouldn't doubt that we have a lot of storms, and I would think that we don't do it. We don't take care of each other as well as we have in the past, especially if we're dependent on the federal government. But I don't think that will necessarily make the news. It's going to be 10,000 small stories, each one with people struggling, and each one, especially, the bottom half of our society that doesn't have resources. Uh, they're going to struggle. There may be more deaths, but even that probably doesn't show up in our system because we're not really designed to. If it's not a something stupid Trump saying, or the political parties, or it doesn't really get much headline, and a lot of people can suffer before the news media notice. But I think it's going to indirectly start hitting us through our financial systems and our pocketbooks, and we're less prepared uh, to buy the diesel fuel or the gasoline. By the way, I want to put a sine wave generator that runs off my car to protect my house, but we'll talk about that on another occasion. Anyway, son, I don't have the metallurgical predictions like I did for the plant, uh, but I do think the problem is going to be led by our finances, and watch the interest rate on the 30-year treasury, and that misery is going to spread to all aspects of our lives. Anyway, talk to you more, son. Let's see if this new recording method works. Have a good one. This is the Ancient Texan. Namaste.